I'm really happy to welcome all of you to our second talk of our New Beginnings Zoom series. My name is Karen Wilkes, and my husband Michael and I own Courthouse Gallery, located here in Ellsworth, Maine. This past year has been a challenge for so many people, as you know, and it seems like everyone's emotions are heightened, making every challenge, small and large, all the more difficult. So when I saw the work coming out of our artist studios earlier this winter, I was inspired to do a show that would lift my spirits as well as everyone else's. The result was this show called New Beginnings. It's a midwinter virtual show highlighting recent work by 12 of our artists, and it acts as a precursor to our upcoming summer exhibitions. This afternoon, we have 4 guest artists joining us. We have Linda Packard, Jeffery Beckton, Lisa Tyson Innis, and Tom Curry. Unfortunately, Linda Packard is unable to participate this evening, although she is included in the show because she's recovering from a non-COVID bilateral pneumonia. Taking her place this evening is her good friend and artist, Kathy Smith, who will talk about Packard's work. The first artist up tonight is Linda Packard, and Linda is a plein air landscape artist who transitioned to a totally process-driven studio practice when her work became abstract. Packard received her BA in studio art from Smith College. She eventually moved to Maine, where she owned a graphic design firm for over 20 years before leaving the company to focus full-time on painting. Packard spent 5 years with the late painter John Ember, whom she cites as one of her greatest influences. In 2015, she was awarded a Hellaker-Lahoughton Residency Fellowship, and in 2017 participated in a month-long residency at Weir Farm in Wilton, Connecticut. She is also going to be featured in Portland Magazine's upcoming issue. I think it might be April. It's an article by Dan Caney, who has matched 3 contemporary artists with 3 people they worked with, and Linda will be matched with John Ember, so that's quite an honor for her, and we're looking forward to the article coming out. Tonight, I would really like to give a warm welcome for Kathy Smith, who is going to be talking about Linda's work. Kathy is a landscape painter, and she's Linda's critique partner in a group that meets monthly. Smith has been awarded 5 notable residencies, including a full fellowship supported by the Joan Mitchell Foundation and an international program for artists in Brittany, France. She received her BFA in painting and drawing from the University of Southern Maine and an MFA in painting from the University of New Hampshire. Kathy has a studio in Bangor, Maine, and she's also an associate professor of studio arts at Husson University. So the piece we're looking at by Linda, it's called A Mariner's Verse. It's an oil on canvas, 30 by 30 inches. So Kathy, Linda lives alone and is used to spending a lot of time by herself, which is perfect for an artist. However, this year has been anything but quiet for Linda, unlike many other people. So what's been going on in her life? And as her critique partner, what changes have you seen in her work recently?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm thrilled to be speaking on Linda's behalf because I've been following her work since about 2015. And we do meet monthly with a group and have been continuing to meet even over Zoom during COVID. So been pretty close to her in the process of making this work. And the big thing that happened in her life, particularly in COVID, was her family, her son and daughter-in-law and baby moved from China to her house. And so while I've always known Linda to have an incredible, diligent studio practice, that was definitely, a positive disruption, having family in her house. She's sort of a lone wolf before in a lot of ways. But basically, in other ways, it made her practice become very much a routine. There's certain days that she's in charge of watching her grandson, which I know she loves, but other days have become very, very focused in the studio. I've watched her, for several years as she transitioned from plein air painting and abstracted landscapes to the work that you see here, which is not necessarily based in any one space, but this particular work and a lot of the work that she's been creating during the pandemic actually has started on old canvases. And so she spoke of, mixing color palettes from old paintings and then sort of destroying and building on surfaces that had already been something else, some of them actually even representational. So anyway, it's been pretty neat to watch this process, and I would speak about her work as almost totally process oriented, as you said, Karen, now, where she does work from sketches and keeps a lot of paintings around, but really these are sort of search images in a lot of ways, where marks are being made on top of marks and then sometimes taken back off, flipping the canvas and going in between more than one piece. So I did ask her a little bit about the title because I thought that would be fun. And it's just a beautiful title, A Mariner's Verse. It's kind of reminds me of some of Turner's paintings where he sort of strapped himself to a boat in a storm. And but she spoke to the rugged marks and the tones of blues that, took some notes here, that kind of the palette, particularly thinking about kind of the ocean at night and perhaps even dockside, which is something I can appreciate. And so, yeah, no, I've been happy to follow her along. I think one of the things that's really inspiring about Linda's work is that she is quite prolific. And I know she had an excellent show at the Courthouse Gallery just recently. And after that sort of undertaking, so stepped back, and that's when her family moved in. So there was a pause, and I think it actually brought something new and different to this next iteration of her journey through abstraction. So anyway, I think that's a good start. And maybe some of our colleagues here want to say or ask questions. I can answer things about process and just the best that I can. I mean, we talk monthly about work. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that one of the things that she has said many times to me, which I sort of love, that's inspired by John Imber, is that once she starts holding on to anything in the piece and sort of savoring one corner of the painting, she knows that that's when to destroy that part, so it's, sort of, again, searching through and working the canvas kind of all over. And because of that, they just have incredible harmonies and unity. And I don't know, there's a lot to look at in her work. Maybe what you don't see when you're looking at it digitally is that she works with both transparent glazes. So they're really luminous, so thinned out paint. And then there are other parts of the paintings that the surface is built up a little bit more. So there's a contrast kind of in the paint quality as well. But you can certainly see it with the marks when you're looking at it here.
Does seem like there's a lot of depth in that painting. It's almost like an underwater view.
Yeah, I agree. I both go in, like, looking up through the water. I love that idea of it. I also kind of end up scanning sort of up and down. So that bright piece in the top.
Well, I would imagine if you were actually a mariner in a storm, it probably would look like that.
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, that's for
Or feel like
Turner,
that anyway. Yeah.
You know what else is interesting about it is that it feels like I'm looking into a stream, like where the trees hang over the stream,
Yeah.
and little bit of sky, and then you can see down into the water, and sometimes you can see the bottom of the water.
I had that same feeling,
That's
but I
right.
was thinking pond.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
yeah, looking down into the water.
I also like the idea that chaos, it's fun to tame chaos. A lot of people are afraid of chaos, but I think it has so much opportunity in it. The more things you add to something, and more and more and more and more, it's so many possibilities.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you both reminded me that when she did her residency at the Weir Farm, some of the work that she applied to it was thickets looking down and through, and this is maybe just before she transitioned to less representational work, but that looking through, and then definitely the energy of her marks is something to I don't know, it's just exciting. It's that chaos ensues. There are quiet moments, but if you look at her work really closely, she actually, the scale of the mark is quite different too. So there sometimes even pencil lines is really, really thin, intricate marks, sort of juxtaposed with big passes. And if you know John Imber's work, I mean, it's full of energy and mark making. And I think she really, got that inspiration from him in some ways. Lately, I've seen her painting a lot in squares. I don't know, Karen, you've probably seen way more, but I know that that's a format that she is drawn to. And I think part of it is the flipping and turning of the image as she's creating it. It's just a whole nother game. And it takes it out of the landscape realm. I mean, Tom, you could speak to that. Once we have a horizontal, we're thinking.
Hey, Kathy, how big is this?
It's 30 by 30 inches.
Okay.
It's pretty good size. She's worked up to like 36 by 48, I think. But for somebody who started really with very small paintings, it was quite a transition to go large.
Yeah, absolutely. And her background, of course, is prior to painting, she was a graphic designer. We were talking about that with typography, but I sort of see the organization still. It's a totally different language, of course. But the other thing I could say is that she, one of the things I love about her studio and myself as a process-oriented painter who's very interested in texture is that she has just tons of crazy tools, and she never gives up all of her secrets, but there are a lot of, the work is really intuitive in terms of mark, color. She sort of develops and finds the palette as she's moving through the painting. But there are just surfaces that you can't really figure out how they were made. And her studio table has all of these kind of like different
I know
brushes.
she's talked about using credit cards to scrape paintings, and she had a talk here a couple of years ago and talked quite a bit about all the paraphernalia she uses to make her mark making.
Right, like a good scavenger. It's like bubble wrap or cardboard, but yeah.
I still feel that even as abstract as these are, it still feels very much grounded in nature.
Mhm.
But even though there's no horizon line.
See through it.
Yeah, totally.
Kathy, you say she's reworking old canvases. Are some of the previous paintings showing?
Yeah. So some of the surface, so the previous painting might have been actually representational even in some of the cases. But yeah, there are areas of the first layers of the previous painting kind of coming through in these works for sure. And I think definitely the connection to nature. I mean, she's a gardener. Just these incredible drawings of the flowers and different things. I know you'll appreciate, Lisa, actually, after looking at your work. But I see them all as landscapes because I'm a landscape painter. It's really hard for me to I mean, you could find structures in them, you can find other things, but I do really feel like she has a deep love and a root in nature still. I think that was a good comment, Karen.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments from you guys, or pretty much set? Well, we're going to move on because we have a lot to get through this afternoon. The next artist we have up is Jeffery Beckton. And Jeffery Beckton creates provocative digital montages inspired by the tidal reaches and atmospheric weather near his home in Deer Isle, Maine. A pioneer in fine art photography, Beckton received his MFA from Yale School of Art in 1976. When he was at Yale, he worked on the mainframe computer there, and it's an experience that primed Jeff to welcome the new digital tools in the mid-1980s. And by the 1990s, early 1990s, Beckton was experimenting with the layering of visual information, living in Maine year-round, and creating surreal scenarios evocative of that in-between space one inhabits when living by the sea.
And how pre-digital.
Beckton's work has been in numerous exhibitions and has been highlighted in national and international publications. And in 2014, we published a monograph of his work, Jeffery Beckton Border World. And in 2016, Bates College Museum of Art held a solo exhibition of Jeff's large-scale monographs that then traveled to museums in 3 states, Tennessee, Florida, and Virginia. Beckton's work is included in numerous private and public collections, including the Bates College Museum of Art, Farnsworth Museum of Art, and the Portland Museum of Art. The montage that we're looking at, it's a new one. It's called Light After Dark, a title we can all sort of relate to nowadays. It's a dye sublimation montage on aluminum. It's 22.5 by 30 inches long. It's an edition of 8 out of 20. Jeff, you're known to be a bit of a hermit. So you
Yes.
must have been very happy to be sequestered at home this past year. However, the outside world has a way of creeping into our psychics, especially this year, because we're all either watching TV or listening to news or whatever. How has the past year affected you and your work?
Well, thanks, Karen, and thanks for inviting me to be a part of this. It's hard to really quantify. I think that I'll start with last summer and say that I was very affected by the violence in the country, and especially by what seemed to be a series of killings of Black men who seemed to be in the act of running away from the police. And I found it all very upsetting on top of the pandemic and everything else, I guess it would be best to say. My life has been pretty much fairly minimally affected, day to day by the pandemic or by Black Lives Matter, or although I did get to go to one Deer Isle demonstration for Black Lives Matter. But anyway, for me, I spent a lot of time in the fall thinking about how to talk about, much less how to make art for me that was organized around or inspired by how Black Lives Matter. As a mariner, someone who spends a lot of time thinking about boats being on the water and so forth, I thought about the way, something that came to stick in my mind was the way slaves came to this side of the Atlantic on sailing ships. And I also know how careful one has to be about portraying something that is not one's own, that that you don't really own. And when it comes to Black Lives Matter, that's certainly something that for me was a departure And what I chose to do was to photograph a piece of sculpture, which is also a lamp by Kinchi. I realize it's not here, the thing that we decided to look at, but it struck me as a generic portrait of a person of color. So I took pictures of that face on that sculpture and started to use it in my work. And I did a number of pictures for a show that Karen had last summer. That sculpture and another piece of art, which was a 18th century, 17th century portrait that I also used. What I'd like to say about this piece, the piece that's on the screen in front of us, is that ever since my 50th college reunion, I have wanted to make a picture like this. And it is basically a picture of a bouquet of paper flowers that I found in my mother-in-law's house after she had passed away and we were cleaning out the house. And I made a number of pictures, straight photographic renderings of that bouquet. And then I set it aside and worked on other things. But in looking through my photos album, I came across this picture, was halfway there, and decided I would go back to work on it. And this is really the final product. I worked on it yesterday, sent it off to Karen. But I think the inspiration for this is a visit to the Mellon Center for British Art in New Haven, because I was, I think, blown away would be an adequate way of putting it, by the painting in the Mellon Center, 18th and 19th century, as well as 20th century British art. The pictures had a sensuality and a presence in the Mellon Center that I really found incredibly inviting. And so this picture was, not an attempt exactly to copy anything in particular. I was really thinking mostly about the kind of heroic light that many of us seem to embody. So this is my, really, I would have to say, my first attempt at making a picture about flowers. I've used bits and pieces of this and in other works, but this is the first one that's really about the flowers.
So where did the background come from, Jeff? Was that a photograph you took?
I stepped out of the studio after a storm had passed and photographed the sky. So this is a thunderstorm that's just, I can't remember whether it's just about to pass over or whether it has just passed over. I think it goes very well with, as a background for these flowers.
I think it's captivating,
I'd like to try other things, but the first thing that spoke to me was the light and the sensuality. But, when I named it Light After Dark, it's inescapable for those of us who have lived through the last 4 years, and especially artists, I would say. But it's been a dark time for a lot of us. And I found it extremely depressing and frustrating. And so for me, this really is an expression of exuberance that comes from having emerged, feeling like we have emerged from a time that very few of us would look back upon as an inspiring time. Those of us who have managed to survive it, and unfortunately, there are an awful lot of us who haven't, we are looking forward to getting back to our lives, the lives that were interrupted in last February or March, depending on where you were. And while my day-to-day existence really hasn't been affected by it very much, my psyche has been troubled, be honest, and say that, Donald Trump has been a real challenge for me. And I'm very grateful not to have to look at his face on a daily basis and hear his voice on a daily basis. So
I think that really comes across in your stormy sky, and the sort of look of funerary flowers.
well,
Yeah, they seem to really, I mean, they really represent life in so many ways for you. I just in talking with you the other day and hearing you speak today, and the light that's captured on each one of the edges of these flowers, it's really exciting to look around and think about growth, but also the sort of beauty that is in a storm that's just passed, or we're in, I don't know, it's a stunning image, and it feels really both like personal, and it also universal. So
yeah, as much as we might feel affected by what's going on around us, what has gone on around us. And, I feel like Lisa mentioned funerary flowers. And I think I was saying yesterday that I also see see them the opposite of that. I mean, I would agree. You can see it. It's easy to see it that way. But I was also thinking there just isn't any stopping the natural world. We may worry about climate change and so forth. And it's certainly a real thing and something that concerns a great many of us. In this case, for me, it's a nod to the fact that nature always calls for living things to try to survive whatever they're presented with. And in this case, I just like the idea that emerging from darkness and seeing the beautiful shapes and colors of what happens when the light returns.
Yeah, it's beautiful, Jeff. Just keeping an eye on the clock here. So we're going to move on to our next artist. Thank you, Jeff. Next up is Lisa Tyson Ennis. Lisa is a photographer who works exclusively with historic processes, including wet plate, collodion, tintype, calotypes, and most recently, cyanotypes. Ennis uses extended exposures over time to document what the eye cannot see, and is known for the ethereal light in her silver gelatin prints. Her work has been in over 80 solo and group exhibitions and has been highlighted in several publications, including the Washington Post, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and most recently, featured on the cover of the preeminent photo magazine Lynn's Work, along with a full spread portfolio. Ennis's work is in several museum collections, including the Museum of Fine Art in Houston, the Delaware Art Museum, and in Maine at the Portland Museum of Art and the Tides Institute, among others. The artwork that we're looking at is a cyanotype. It's 48 by 24 inches. The actual artwork is here on the right-hand side, and on the left is a detail so that you can see it. It's quite an exquisite artwork. The title is Botanical Alchemy. Lisa, you recently moved from Lubec, Maine, where you had been making silver gelatin prints of the historic fish houses that are sadly disappearing there, to Castine, where you've been making these incredible cyanotypes. Briefly tell us about your past year and how you got involved in making these and what it's like.
Okay. Thanks for doing this, Karen. Yes, like you said, I just moved here with my husband to Castine, and last winter I was working on a project about climate change, and I was also taking a historic processes class with the wonderful Brenton Hamilton at Maine Media Workshops, where I was really learning the intricacies of cyanotype. And I was working in my darkroom on this project about climate change, and it was depressing. And then COVID hit, and then Black Lives Matter. And I really did hit a wall, and just stopped working for a little while. And I went into my garden. I took long walks along the ocean, in the woods, and around here, and really felt I had time to start looking at these things closer. And one day I was out working in my garden, for example, and I pulled out a garlic scape, and it was so beautiful. And I just thought, you just can't do better than this. You just can't do better. And I came into my studio and I hung it on the wall, and I started thinking about shape and form. And that's what cyanotype is. It's a cameraless process. So you're literally laying either a negative or plant material onto paper. And in my case, I'm coating large sheets of paper, watercolor paper or canvas, in my darkroom with two very benign iron salts that, when they're combined, they become light sensitive. And so I paint on this in various layers, this light sensitive solution. And then I lay whatever plant material I've collected from my walks or my garden or onto the paper or canvas, and carry this dripping collection out into the elements. And it stays out there for, it can be several days out there, where the sun is creating an exposure. The sun, all the elements are creating exposure, moisture, the humidity, the heat, wind. It's wind gets under the glass because there's glass holding down the plant material. And it's really, I feel like it's like a collaboration with nature. And I really, it's sort of out of my hands. I mean, I lay the plant material down, but it's this very freeing process where, I get to be completely hands-on with the materials that I've collected. And I imagine a lot of people have heard of the British botanist Anna Atkins, who did really exquisite, they were meant to be scientific illustrations of seaweed, but she ended up, they were so beautiful that she really crossed the line into art as well, and is generally known as one of the first or the first female photographer. I guess that's kind of what I have to say about it. Like I said, it's just been a very freeing process. That the silver gelatin, wet plate collodion, all those processes are very meticulous and I love them. But this process is joyful. It's really a joyful way to create art. And working with, well, right now I have seaweed. There really aren't any plants out there to make them with, but it's been really fun working with seaweed also. And so that's kind of what I have to say about it.
Is the blue background, is that a part of the chemicals, or is that
Yes.
something that is that?
Yes, so cyanotype is known for its very Prussian blue coloring. You can see in this image, there's also some yellows and reds, and those are literally the essence of the plant. In this process, the landscape is actually drawing itself which is rather thrilling. But those are juices from the plants. There's often seed heads or, all kinds of stuff gets embedded into the paper because it's out there for so long.
And the same that the texture, I mean, there's so much space in these, first of all, they're so beautiful. And I love picturing you gathering all of these things and going out. A lot of us were out in nature for, this time period, but composing in the dark and then bringing them out to the light. And then also just, I guess the first where I started was the texture, and that the space in the background is really evocative to me, but of deep space, and I wonder if that's the chemicals, or, I mean, how are you getting the, like in the top quarter of the image, all of that texture?
So I can layer lots of different things that, I've tried. You can spray vinegar, or you can lay soap bubbles, or, scrunch up tissue paper. There's a lot of different ways to create layering, and then layering plant material over others. So it's a lot of layering.
Didn't you say, Lisa, that like in this area where you can, oops, sorry about that, where you can see the kind of pinkish and yellow plant material, that it's actually embedded onto the watercolor paper, some of the
It
plants?
is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, often leaves are left in there. I think those are actually like essence from the flowers, because those were the colors of those flowers.
Mhm.
But you never know what you're going to get. So it's really a joy, because it's always a surprise when you pull off the plant material, see what is actually there.
Yeah, it's like, it reminds, well, printmaking or monotypes, of that type of nature, where you're making, and you are making marks, and you are clearly arranging, but the beauty is in what the art produces in itself, in a way, what the materials do on the surface. And this is huge, right? It's 48 inches.
48 inches tall, yes.
Right. So it's the actual plant on there. So they're one of those on there is bee balm, and it's very tall. It was a tall flower. So it is the actual plant on there.
So it's not just the plant interrupting the light that's hitting the paper. It's, I know it's that, but how does light affect the emulsion that's on the paper? If you could describe that in general.
Well, you mix these two iron salts together with water, and it's a very benign process. It's, you can get it on your hands, and it's, as Karen saw in my studio, it's all over my studio because it's a messy.
Looks like Dennis the Menace
but-
went through there.
Yeah. I don't know if you can see, there's cardboard paper all over the floor here, but
You're all in. You're all in.
yeah, it's on the walls and the door, it's everywhere, but it's a good studio.
So, but with the light, so the plant and different materials, chemicals are now blocking the light, and then the other part of the paper is exposed. But this time of year, you said that you're making them, right? So
I am making them, but they have to stay out for 3 or 4 days to get enough sunlight to, like I've been making them with kelp, and just to be able to penetrate through that kelp to give any kind of detail to those big fronds, it is going to be several days. And they freeze and they get snowed on, and but it's all part of it. I just welcome all of that.
Didn't you say you also,
Just the elements.
didn't you say you were also making some in the ocean?
I am. So there's a West Coast artist named Megan Rippenhoff, and she's been taking cyanotype paper out into the Pacific. And it was very inspiring to see her work. And I thought, well, let's see what Maine's waters will do. And so, yeah, I am doing that too. And, you know, depending on the fury of the wave, it can actually just mesh little pebbles and sand and grit right into the paper. And, you know, it might fall off and it might not. But
Well,
I love
thank
that they
you.
have that
Mhm.
movement in them, you know, the same, thinking back to just the last image we looked at, which was so still and striking and really, but this piece, it does remind me actually of Linda's work with the frenetic energy in the marks. And it's just great to think that nature's doing the dance just as much as you, I guess.
yeah, I love that part of it. I really do. Like collaboration sort of. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lisa. We're going to move on to our last artist tonight, which is Tom Curry. Tom Curry is a plein air artist, painter who prefers working outdoors in direct contact with nature. After moving to Maine in 1995, he is still in love with the Maine landscape. I still can't believe how gorgeous Maine is, he says. It's serene but disheveled. It's raw and not overly organized. Curry, who has been painting for over 25 years, frequently revisits the landscape of Chatto, a small island just offshore from his home. Chatto has become the subject of an ongoing series of over 60 paintings, which were highlighted in the monograph Island Paintings by Tom Curry, published by Down East Books. Curry's work has been featured in numerous publications, including Down East Magazine, Art New England, the Boston Globe, and the New Yorker. Among others, he received his BFA from Rhode Island School of Design in 1981. And in 1982, he attended the graduate program at Yale. In 1987, he earned his MS from the University of Massachusetts. The painting we're looking at is quite large. It's 26 inches tall by 64 inches wide. It's an oil on canvas. It's called Evening Light on Camden Hills. Tom, welcome.
Hey, thank you.
What kind of challenges has the pandemic created for you, and how has it affected your work? And what inspired you to use these striking colors in this painting?
All right. I really think I have been struggling a little bit with all of the alone time, but I mean, like I balance it with the studio. I mostly miss visiting friends and things like that, but I think with work, I think what it is I almost feel like I run to the studio, you know? It's a place to sort of explore things that I'm thinking about. And these paintings right here are kind of like a big overlook. For a long time, I would do small, intimate paintings, shallow spaces, and not much distance. But of course, after living in the city, coming out to Maine, the big sky became, I mean, it may not feel like the big sky of Texas or someplace, but just to see this open area. And so this painting is moreover about play. I find that I take things very seriously oftentimes when I work, and a painting has this transitional period where you start, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I know what I'm going to do. And then, of course, you realize that you have no idea. And that's the part that I find the most intriguing about it. You have to sort of let go of intention. And so I find, and this is just pretty much new now for me in the last maybe a month or two, and that is a painting doesn't have to be a long suffering project. it can actually have this little gift of light, something that opens up and you're like, oh my gosh, you can be astonished by something. And it could actually happen in the first few hours of a painting, which is like, wow. I always thought you had to suffer for so long. I do. I still suffer. But I also have been doing things kind of crazy. It's like, I mean, I may overwork a painting to the extent of now, you know, I've gone past the beautiful stage into the sort of horrifying stage. And then I take the sanding disc out because it's on a panel. I push things out that have become too strong, and then I let some other parts come in and then work on top of that. But I think what I also like to do is I like to set up some strong darks and strong lights. And I think that sort of creates this, it may, you know, I mean, we are sort of like gods in a way. We create stuff, you know, and we are creating this landscape or whatever it is our subject is. So I'm letting part of the painting be more playful. And so that's why these islands are so bright, you know. I'm always photographing things, sky and the light on the shearing light across the landscape when the sun is just coming down or just coming up, it just cuts across. And it changes the colors even of pines and spruce into this sort of luminescent. And I'm always interested in these crazy lights. And I do a lot of spending on time outside. All summer, I try to paint every day for 4 or 5 hours painting outside. And then I take lots of photographs and, you know, I'm always astonished at all of these little interesting aspects of the world around us. And, you know, and I also do studio work. So if there's something that I want to play with, I will take that drawing or painting from outside, bring it in, and then try to expand it a little bit. So, yes.
Well, you know, it's really good, Tom, that after all these years of painting, you can still be astonished. I mean, that's quite an achievement right there by whatever comes out on the canvas. And, you know.
Well, you know what else is? This painting is up on sort of a volcano in, I know it doesn't sound possible, but in Dural. Yeah, it's the top of a like, that's what I was told it was. You know, I don't know if it's true, but it's overlooking the Camden Hills, and it's a remarkable spot. I always love to find these different crazy spots, and you know, probably 99% of the time, if I do a painting, nobody asks me, "Hey, where is that? Where did you do that painting?" And so, you know, we can play with these subjects and change them and manipulate them around a little bit to make them work for us. And I think that's one of the things that I really learned at RISD was design. A heavy emphasis on design. And I just think that a lot of my compositions are kind of a little bit tweaked. They're not exactly in the same spot. I had one funny episode where I was working over at Curtis Cove on a very similar size picture and working in acrylic because I like the fact that it dries so fast. So I set up 2 easels, put the painting out. I'm looking at Curtis Cove. And so I set it up and I start working with red. I draw the whole thing out. And then I said, well, you know what? I'm going to just turn this whole thing over. And now I'm going to use blue. Start doing blue. And then I was like, no, I don't really like that. So I turned it over again. And from the back behind me on the road, someone says, Mom, what's he doing? And, and I think, you know, that was a sort of the crazy chaos that you can get. And I actually prefer that chaos at the beginning of a painting. I like it much more at the beginning than I like it at the end. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
It's interesting that three of the four of us have, you know, a design, some design in our background.
Yes.
I mean, you got it at RISD. My MFA was actually in graphic design.
Wow.
I'd signed up because I wanted an art education, and it looked like that was the best way
Right.
to get one, was because they seem to study everything. If you look at the course catalog, you know, the low so many years ago.
Right.
But you know, I think that my time, you know, working with graphic design helped my, you know, my photography enormously. Anything I do, you know, it was a great time. But
Right. Yes.
Lisa, did you have any design background, or just curious?
No.
No, but you're a photographer also, so you're always looking through a specific plane, right? And the way you
Yes.
organize space.
Yes.
In this piece, Tom, I mean, I love that it's expansive, that it's bigger. If you were in front of it, it would sort of, you know, like the abstract expressionist, sort of envelope you in the image. But when I think about design in this piece, it's so clear that you're playing with color interaction, right? And dropping high intensity colors next to each other, but pushing the value, and it's just striking. You know, I'm a landscape painter myself, and I know that moment of the sky, and I'm always sort of like, oh, if I could just do that sky, that green gold, and it's so pale. And anyway, so I love that this piece is sort of logical and illogical and some ways, but it really seems to me that it's about color interaction as much as the composition and the placement. And, you know, it's a great thing about being a painter, is being able to shift things. And
I agree.
Lisa, how much does scale? I mean, you're able to work in a much larger scale easily using the cyanotype method than you were, you know, using silver, doing traditional silver prints. And I would think, my guess is that you find working larger exciting. We have
Super exciting.
Yeah.
It really is. I'm limited by the size glass that I can carry. But yeah, I mean, it is. And just like this painting, where, like you were saying, Kathy, you're going to be enveloped by it. I love this painting. I love the dark trees, because you feel like you're in there. You're in the woods, and then you have like what Rebecca Solnit called the blue of distance out there, and then those golden islands are rather joyous feeling.
Yeah, so you know, part of this whole thing for me was as it got darker, I wanted things to be lighter. I mean, I noticed that it's almost like things can get too sort of subdued. And what I want to bring to my work is sort of an electrical kind of a brilliance to it. I want to bring this brightness. I think it stems from, I was a pastel artist for about 30 years, and I worked with lots of layering of color, and layering of color was sort of like your glazing process in paint. And I worked with everything in the complementary color, and I worked on big sheets of this wonderful paper called Wallace paper. It had aluminum oxide surface, so it just perfect for pastel. It was like, oh my gosh, it was like a lipstick on a mirror, you know. It was just like, oh, every time you put a pastel down, it wasn't like this scratching chalkboard feeling. It was just like, whoa. And the funny thing about that was, I would be working outside and I would have this painting of, let's just say, water and some sky. And the sky would be all orange and yellow and stuff. And then the land and trees would be red. And these people would slow down because they saw the artist by the side of the road. You know, they would slow down, and just as they could see what I was working on, they speed up and take off. Now, I would say that they were thinking I might have been a sort of off my marbles, but so what happened was that kind of underpainting, then you spray a shellac over it, and then you work on top of that with the actual colors, and then you let some of that color come through. And so this is what's happening with, say, these islands, is sort of like breaking a little bit of color underneath. And yes, maybe it's a little imaginary, but I think that's the fun part about it. And I'm sure it's true with all of us. What kind of mistakes can we do, and what kind of mistakes are interesting, and how can we play with this and be open to the possibility?
I love that, the excavating, the sanding. I went through a process recently in my own work, but I know Linda also sort of make layers and cover, and then, sort of either sands or pulls from underneath. And it's just so exciting, particularly in this piece where the orange, it's so luminous that anyway, it's all about
But,
searching for images.
Tom, it's easy to focus on the islands in the mid-ground there. The trees feel very much more traditional, and the islands are great. But I keep going back to the Camden Hills and that light purple and the way they're painted and the yellow green sky over them. It's the whole thing is such an unusual combination, but somehow you've made it all work. So, we could be standing there looking at that scene and, see it 10 different ways. But this is, like you said, it's a way that's like woke you up kind of, and like, wow,
Also, like,
this is what it feels like.
I want to go to that space. I want to be there.
Yeah, I love the islands in the middle, but I keep going back to the horizon, and the hills and the sky in the background are really unusual and captivating. So it's very nice. Anyway, it's about 5 after 5, so I would like to open it up to audience questions. If anybody has a question for any of the artists, there is a Zoom raise your hand feature down at the bottom of your participant screen. If you want, you can also chat your question. Oh, the first one to ask a question is Jeff's wife. You just have to unmute. She probably wants to know where you are, Jeff. She just have to unmute yourself, Hillary, and go ahead with your question.
She's escaped.
Okay, I'm on. This is actually for Kathy about Linda's work. How does she know what's up or what's down? Does she care? Because I did buy an abstract painting from an artist you may know, A.B. Clare, but I hung it sideways and not the way she had intended. And I was very worried that she would be very upset about that. But is it, how does she come to know what's up or down, or does she care?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and probably Karen can speak to it too, because she's installed her work quite a lot. But I've known her to actually have hangers in more than one direction. And when we look at them in the studio, even all of us, we're sort of shifting and turning them. And I feel like for Linda, it's really important that it works in all directions. And eventually she sort of lands on this or that, but a lot of them, I have seen her flip sideways later. I think in this particular piece, it's probably the weight of the darker blues at the bottom that kind of ground it. But I think just as much of the process of painting and sort of exploring, she's really experimenting with that exact piece. Should be on its side, should it be on, and where there's squares, that is almost easier to do. So I don't have a perfect answer for you, but I think if you love to, I have seen her definitely shift paintings from one direction to the other. And yeah, it's a great thing about abstraction, really.
I would say the same thing, Hillary, that's the beauty of abstract art. You can hang it in more than one way, and whatever appeals to you is just as important as whatever the artist intended. And Linda does have wires in more than one place in case, you know, you want to make it vertical instead of horizontal. We have do you have anything else, Hillary? We have another question here. Blake Brown has a question. Blake, you're on.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, hi Jeffrey. It's Allison Brown, his wife, and we fell in love with your work years and years ago at the Turtle Gallery. And we've since bought a few of your pieces of the domestic interiors. And after you said about the your graphic design background, it makes sense how you arrange the how do you call it, the structure of the picture. And we've been following you since then with your evolution into more ephemeral palettes and more abstraction. And we were blown away totally by the flowers. They came out of nowhere. And we were wondering if that's because they're so saturated and it's so centralized. The subject matter is so centralized. And we were wondering if is that your new direction, or is that just like an anomaly?
It's hard to say. I have approached things in a frontal way. And in fact, I would say that is my major way of handling a subject is front and center frontal. But I have no idea that the flowers are, they're very seductive. I find them very seductive, even though, you know, when this is an iPhone capture and done in Bethesda, and I've been playing with it ever since. So, you know, one of the ways that I find things that I want is by cruising through the 20,000 or so pictures in my photos folder, you know, pictures that I just keep for this purpose, for inspiration, or to use bits and pieces of. I've never really worked in series. If it ends up that way, it's because the series continues to be compelling or interesting to me, and that's the reason why I've been asked a number of times by curators if I'm working in series, and and the answer is no. If it turns out that way, you can call it a series. If not, don't bother. But it's kind of an open-ended question. But the fact is that I just don't know where I'm going. I never do. I learn from my mistakes. That's always a great way to find a new direction. Is one of the first things that was said during this talk was, I think Karen talking about, maybe it was Kathy, talking about a part of a picture that you're unwilling to give up. You love it and you're unwilling to give it up. And I have had, even though I think writers have the same problem, there's a piece of prose that they just love. And if you can't make things work with it, you eventually have to give it up. And no matter how much you like it. And I've had it both ways. Sometimes I've worked on pictures for more than a year, several years, before I found a way to make it work.
It'll be fun to see what you come up with next, whether this is a new journey or whether it just was a one-time gorgeous thing.
Yeah, I hope that I find something. I'm looking for something like the flowers, because if you're ever in New Haven, I say this to all, go into the Mellon Center for British Art.
Yeah, I have done that.
Because you'll see some of the best painting there is.
Thanks for
thank you,
Blake. We have another question here by Gail. Gail, you can go ahead with your question.
Hi. Thanks. I write about the arts, and I followed Lisa's work for a long time, and I have some of it. I don't have these, so I'm very interested to see them. But I had a question for her. I know your sizes, Lisa, are determined by the flora that you find or harvest, but do you have a favorite size? Like, this is huge. Is this a size you're you're going to work in a lot, or, and is it possible in cyanotype to have another color background, or is pretty much everything somehow based in that Prussian blue?
Well, hi, Gail. Nice to see you. So I started out with this size because I had these flowers that were this size, and I sort of love the idea of like a Japanese scroll, hanging them like that. I have done other, I've always been drawn to square, and so I have done some squares, and I just am very much drawn to this long, thin format right now. So I will probably be doing other ones. I've actually been doing some that are about 10 feet tall now, and very much in that scroll vein. As far as the blue, that is cyanotype, so it is going to be blue, and you can affect it by changing the chemistry, like I said before, you know, changing the pH with vinegar or baking soda, spraying differently. You can change the colors, and the plants also do change the colors, but primarily, yeah, it'll be blue.
So when you work in something that's 10 feet, do you have to carry a 10-foot long piece of glass?
Yes, John, my husband, has been very, very helpful in that scenario. And, you know, his clothes are now covered with cyanotype also.
Well, I know you used to drag cameras around, but this is even bigger than that.
Yeah, I've never, you know, it's just such an exciting time for photography because you've got somebody like Jeff right at the very pinnacle of digital imaging, and you know, I'm backwards with these big heavy old cameras, and but there's so many possibilities in photography right now. It's really exciting.
Does anybody have any other questions, or do you have another question, Gail? I don't see anybody with their hand raised. You can either raise your hand or you can chat a question at the bottom of your participants thing. There is a place where you can raise your hand.
I just wanted to say I'm really delighted to see everybody's work. It's really exciting. And I know this is a part of a bigger show, so I'll look forward to seeing even more.
Yeah, this summer, everybody's work will be in shows, and we should have that up on our website soon. Thank you, Gail. Hillary has another question. Go, you have to unmute yourself, Hillary.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is for Tom, because Tom, I've been looking at your work for years, and it just seems it wasn't how well. You tell me, how long ago was it that your palette really took off, really changed from your oils? Because we have one that's all fog, you know, very little color, and then some more traditional, but it seems like your work has taken on a very fun, wilder tone, and I just wondered when this happened, and are you going to stay with it, or, you know, just talk to me.
You know what? I actually think that during this dark time, this pandemic and everything, that I cut myself much more slack. I definitely have worked in many different ways, and I had a funny experience where I had a show down in Damascata at a place called the Courthouse Gallery, probably 15 years ago, and it was, of course, in July. But and I was leading up to the show, and all that we were in like a 3-week period of fog in Maine. 3 weeks, can I say that louder, of fog in Maine. And I had this show coming up, and finally I just gave up, and I just sort of like immersed myself in painting fog, and I felt like I had sort of like a vision, of just, even though the fog was, kind of a gray blue, in the morning it could be a kind of sort of a crimson color, So I sort of picked up on a lot of subtlety of color. And I don't like to be hamstrung by making it just exactly the way I see it all the time. I really like the idea of playing with color. And, I kind of like to bring you right up to the edge of, oh no, that would never happen. You know what I mean? I really think that that's kind of like, it helps the viewer. It sort of gives the viewer a little extra sort of like possibility. And I think that especially during this dark time, man, we just need color. I mean,
I agree.
it's just, I'd like to be considered a fauvist, in Maine. And so, yes, I have many, many different types of palettes, and I I do fall back into that pattern of grays to stand off other things, but I'm being more and more drawn to this fun of color, just the playfulness, the Joseph Albers of color,
Yeah, well, it's great. Well, thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you, Hillary.
Thanks for the question.
Hi, Bill. This is Bill Irvin.
Yeah, I just want to ask Jeff a question. The early work of yours was mainly black and white. And then a few years ago, your work changed to mainly color. And I think you have a wonderful sense of color, actually. I love it. But I'm wondering why you made that change, and what do you find is the difference between working in black and white and working in color? Is there a way in which you express yourself differently when you use the black and white and then color? I'm just curious why you made that change.
Well, I made the change when the digital revolution, as I'll just call it the digital revolution, it took a while for color that you could represent on screen and or print. At first, for a while, the only thing I could do with color, once Apple got around to making a computer that had show 16 million colors, that was great. I started to work in make color compositions that way. But in the beginning, what I was doing was I was scanning in black and white prints and stitching them together in Photoshop and then colorizing them. So in a sense, the composition was already there in black and white in the beginning, in my early days of using color. And I had to figure out I gave up very early trying to make them look like any remembrance I have place. I just made the composition entirely based on what colors, how happy the colors seem to be with each other. But even today, occasionally I use a piece of a picture of a negative that's from black and white. I noticed that there were pictures that I did in black and white that I was really surprised at how well color worked with them. So in the first, let's call it 3 years at least, all the color I did was done scanning in black and white, and working on a screen in Photoshop was something that was very different and very exciting. But when you added color to it, it was kind of scary and confusing in a way. What I didn't want to have is something that looked like photographic color, that looked like a C print. Well, when all my images became color images, because every camera that I had was photographing in color, that's really was a big difference. At first, I was working with black and white. Then I was working with black and white digitally. Then I was working with black and white digitally with moving to color rather than in black and white.
We had a show a few years ago of Jeff's work, and Dan Caney, the art critic for the Portland Press Herald, actually said Jeff was the best colorist in Maine. Quote.
He has that tattooed on his chest.
Yes. Oh, it's not on my forehead. Oh,
Well, I think you use color very expressively. They don't look like color photographs at all. They look like works of art. They're beautifully placed, the color in the right place for the expression. I think you have a great ability to use color.
well, thank you, Bill.
I'd like to thank all of the artists for participating, especially Kathy Smith, who volunteered to sit in for Linda tonight, who unfortunately could not be with us. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. And it's been a delight to have this series in February. We're usually not here this time of year. And so it's made it all the more bearable to have all this wonderful art shared with us. So anyway, I'd like to thank everybody, and I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. Good night, guys.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.